I can't make him stop. Charles Whitmore's voice echoed off the high ceilings of the Whitmore mansion, sharp and tense, cutting through the soft whimpers of his son, Eli, as they bounced rhythmically across the polished marble floors. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sound, heavy with the weight of control and expectation. Every frame of the sprawling estate filled with the invisible pressure of perfection that Charles demanded from himself and his family. Aaliyah Brooks stepped lightly across the room, her dark skin glowing softly under the warm afternoon light streaming through the tall windows, her hands gripping a small tray of warm milk and a folded blanket, movements precise and deliberate. The camera would linger on the gentle clench of her jaw, the almost imperceptible tremor in her fingers, the way her eyes never wavered from the small figure huddled on the floor, rocking in anxiety, searching for comfort she alone seemed ready to offer. Every breath she took was measured, a quiet anchor in the chaos of the room, the faint rustle of her uniform barely audible over the distant hum of the mansion's ventilation system and the muffled ticking of an antique grandfather clock down the hall. Charles's silhouette loomed behind her, shoulders tense, jaw tight, a man used to solving problems with logic and authority, now frozen by the helplessness that clung to the space between them, a sense of urgency settling like a storm cloud in the high, sunlit room. Aaliyah crouched slowly, keeping her posture deliberate, showing neither fear nor hesitation, her eyes following Eli's every shuddering movement, giving him space while offering a presence that was steady and warm, a living counterpoint to the cold precision of the mansion and the rigid lines of Charles's expression. The sounds of the estate, the soft padding of her shoes across the thick carpet runner, the faint clinking of a spoon on the tray, the subtle creak of the floorboards under the weight of the household, were amplified by the silence that hung between moments, emphasizing every small choice she made, each careful motion a conversation with the boy too young to speak what he felt. The lens of attention, if imagined, would swing from Eli's quivering hands clutching at his own sleeves to Aaliyah's calm, controlled gestures, the tilt of her head as if signaling safety without words, her breath shallow yet steady, a rhythm meant to soothe, a human presence engineered to anchor the tiny storm of emotion unraveling before them. Charles shifted slightly, the hard leather of his chair groaning under him, a subtle reminder of his wealth and his habit of measuring the world by what he could control. Yet nothing in his experience had prepared him for the quiet power of patience and understanding emanating from a young woman whose life had taught her resilience and empathy beyond the luxuries he had always taken for granted. Outside, the sunlight glinted on the manicured hedges and glistening fountain, but inside, the room held its own gravity, a suspended moment where time seemed to stretch and the air thickened with anticipation, each second holding the promise of a breakthrough or a breakdown. Aaliyah's eyes locked on Eli, noting the quick inhale before a soft sigh, the tiniest pause in the rocking of his body, a flicker of recognition that someone saw him, truly saw him, and offered solace without judgment. A bridge built silently, imperceptibly, between despair and trust. Charles exhaled slowly, almost involuntarily, his stern features softening as the reality of helplessness met the possibility of hope, the first crack in the armor of authority forming as he watched the maid he had underestimated and overlooked take her place in the center of care, showing a form of influence he could not command, could not legislate, but could only witness. The soundscape shifted, subtle, the rustle of the blanket, the quiet hum of the old chandelier, the faint murmur of the wind against the tall windows, layers of atmosphere that framed a scene of intimate connection and silent courage, every element in the room bending toward the simple truth that human empathy, even in a mansion filled with privilege and expectation, could command attention more powerfully than wealth, more insistently than authority, and Aaliyah's careful, deliberate presence set the stage for a transformation no one had anticipated, the kind of moment that would ripple forward, hinting at a larger story still to unfold beyond the walls of the sunlit room. The afternoon sunlight shifted slowly across the polished hardwood floors of the Whitmore mansion, illuminating the delicate dust motes floating through the warm beams, each speck suspended like a tiny, golden planet in the quiet atmosphere of the estate. Aaliyah Brooks moved with precision and calm, carrying a small, folded blanket and a soft toy she had found in the corner of the nursery, her steps measured and purposeful, her presence radiating patience and care that seemed to contrast sharply with the rigid formality of the mansion around her. Eli shifted slightly, the soft fabric of his pajamas brushing against the thick carpet, and for the first time in what felt like hours, he did not flinch or pull away from the warmth Aaliyah offered. The camera, if imagined as an observer, would linger on the subtle rise and fall of his small shoulders, the quiet intake of breath that hinted at relief, and the way his fingers tentatively reached toward the blanket, brushing against the edge with careful curiosity. Charles Whitmore watched from the doorway, the hard lines of his jaw softened by surprise and a growing sense of wonder. His usually commanding posture slightly bent forward, almost as if he were trying to understand the invisible force that held the room in a delicate balance of tension and calm. The soft hum of the chandelier overhead mingled with the faint whir of the air conditioning, creating a layered backdrop of sound that emphasized the stillness of the moment, each detail magnified by the quiet anticipation that seemed to pulse through the air like a heartbeat. Aaliyah lowered herself gently to sit beside Eli, her hands resting lightly on the floor as if to communicate safety without intrusion, and her voice, a calm murmur, floated through the room, guiding and soothing with the rhythm of gentle words and soft inflection, every syllable designed to provide reassurance while respecting the boy's space. The room felt simultaneously enormous and intimate, every shadow cast by the sunlight dancing across the walls, the furniture, and the soft textures of the carpet, a visual echo of the emotions unfurling in real time. Charles's eyes followed the interaction closely, noting how Aaliyah's presence seemed to anchor the room itself, how the smallest gestures, a tilt of the head, a slow movement of the hand, the patient pause before each word, were enough to draw Eli into a calm orbit, his previously restless energy finally finding a point of balance. Outside, the gentle breeze shifted the curtains slightly, letting in a fleeting shimmer of movement that reflected on the polished surfaces, drawing attention to the stillness within. Aaliyah's focus never wavered, her breathing steady and deliberate, matching the subtle rhythm she coaxed from Eli, and each small adjustment of posture or eye contact reinforced a silent promise of safety and attention. Charles, feeling the weight of his authority diminished in the face of simple, earnest kindness, found himself experiencing a mixture of humility and awe, the realization dawning that control was not always about instructions or commands, but sometimes about observation, patience, and the courage to offer calm in the midst of turmoil. As Eli's soft whimpers faded into quiet curiosity, his eyes lifted just enough to meet Aaliyah's gaze, a fleeting connection charged with understanding and trust, and the air seemed to vibrate gently with the unspoken acknowledgement that a shift had occurred, one that would ripple beyond this room, hinting at the profound changes still to come in the dynamics between child, caretaker, and father within the grand, yet now emotionally transformed walls of the Whitmore mansion. The soft afternoon light shifted as Aaliyah Brooks continued to guide Eli through the quiet rhythm she had established, her hands hovering gently above his small shoulders, ready to intervene only if needed, while her voice remained calm, measured, each word a carefully placed anchor designed to steady him without overwhelming. Eli's breathing slowed gradually, the tension in his small body releasing like water seeping from a tight fist, and his wide, curious eyes began to track her movements with attentive trust, the soft curls of his hair catching the sunlight as he shifted slightly to face her. Charles Whitmore stood just beyond the doorway, the hard edges of his suit and the meticulous fold of his tie reflecting the perfection he usually demanded from the world around him, yet now softened by the quiet realization that presence, patience, and empathy could achieve what authority and wealth could not. The camera, if imagined, would linger on the subtle rise and fall of Aaliyah's chest, the careful coordination of her hands as she adjusted a blanket under Eli, and the faintest hint of a smile brushing her lips, barely perceptible yet powerful in its effect, creating a contrast with the rigid posture of Charles, whose knuckles lightly tapped against the wooden doorframe as he observed, absorbing each delicate gesture and its impact. Outside, the filtered sunlight moved across the floors, casting long, soft shadows that shifted with the passage of time, emphasizing the slow, deliberate pace of the room, each second stretched and weighted with the significance of the moment unfolding. Aaliyah's movements were almost choreographed, a series of small, intentional acts. She shifted a pillow slightly, rearranged a small toy within Eli's reach, and mirrored his subtle shifts in posture, each adjustment reinforcing his sense of safety and control, the attention to detail creating an unspoken language between them. Eli's hands moved slightly, reaching tentatively to touch the soft fabric of the blanket she had placed beside him, his fingers brushing against her own in a gesture of hesitant connection, a silent acknowledgement that the space she created was safe and welcoming. Charles's expression softened further, a flicker of awe and recognition in his eyes as he watched the interaction, noting how a single human presence, unassuming and patient, could diffuse tension and create trust in ways that no wealth, command, or schedule could achieve. The room felt suspended in time, every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of sunlight across the walls, and every quiet breath layered into a symphony of subtle motion and feeling, underscoring the extraordinary nature of the ordinary acts Aaliyah performed. As Eli's breathing became more even, his head resting briefly against the blanket she had placed, the tension in Charles's shoulders seemed to dissolve slightly, replaced by a contemplative stillness, a recognition that guidance, care, and empathy were instruments just as powerful as authority and resources. Aaliyah maintained her focus, her eyes scanning for the smallest sign of discomfort or unease, ready to respond with another gentle gesture or word. Her entire presence a careful balance of attentiveness and patience that created a safe harbor for Eli. The mansion, usually so formal and imposing, seemed to shrink around them, the grandeur taking a quiet back seat to the intimacy and sincerity of the moment. And the air was thick with a sense of potential transformation, the possibility that the connection established here would ripple beyond the nursery walls and influence both father and child in ways that only patience and understanding could initiate. Every small movement, every subtle glance, every gentle breath contributed to a narrative of calm and empathy, layering texture, depth, and emotion over the structured environment of wealth and expectation, creating a tableau where human kindness and attention to emotional detail became the true measure of influence and authority within the household. The afternoon light began to tilt lower, casting long, soft shadows across the polished floors of the Whitmore mansion, highlighting the intricate patterns in the marble and reflecting faint glimmers on the edges of the furniture. Aaliyah Brooks remained crouched beside Eli, her posture careful and deliberate, every movement measured as if choreographed to create a safe rhythm that the boy could anticipate and respond to. The subtle rise and fall of her chest, the way her hands hovered just above the blankets without touching, each action was precise, a signal of calm and presence that contrasted sharply with the grandeur and stillness of the mansion around them. Eli's breathing had slowed to a steady rhythm, his small fingers now resting lightly on the edge of the blanket, tentative yet trusting, and the slight tilt of his head indicated a growing awareness that he was seen, that his fear had found acknowledgement and a gentle response. Charles Whitmore remained at the doorway, the stiffness in his frame easing as he observed, noting every minute shift in the interaction, the quiet authority of empathy that Aaliyah wielded effortlessly, the subtle ways she communicated reassurance without words, her gaze unwavering, her movements deliberate, the air around her almost tangible in its steadiness. The soft hum of the chandelier above mingled with the faint creak of the floorboards and the muted whisper of the air conditioning, layering an atmosphere of stillness punctuated only by the delicate sounds of Eli adjusting to the presence beside him, creating a natural cadence that Charles had never considered in his meticulous planning of schedules, instructions, and control. Aaliyah gently shifted a small pillow closer to Eli, her movements slow and precise, aligning the fabric so that it could provide support without interfering, her fingers brushing against the surface with deliberate care, the action almost imperceptible but weighted with intention. The sunlight filtered through the tall windows, illuminating tiny dust motes in motion, a visual echo of the transformation occurring in the room as tension gave way to tentative calm, each glint of light on polished surfaces marking the passage of time and the subtle changes in Eli's posture and attention. Charles's gaze softened further as he saw the boy tilt slightly toward Aaliyah, his hands brushing tentatively against the blanket she had positioned, a quiet acknowledgement of safety and trust forming between child and caretaker. The mansion, usually so imposing and formal, seemed to recede into the background, every ornate frame and polished surface giving space to the quiet drama of human connection unfolding in the nursery, a dynamic where patience, presence, and empathy held greater weight than status or wealth. Aaliyah's focus remained absolute, her eyes scanning for any signs of discomfort or unease, ready to adjust her movements, her hands, and her voice to respond without intrusion. A continuous, fluid communication that Eli responded to instinctively, his small body beginning to relax fully into the gentle rhythm she set. Charles exhaled slowly, a mixture of astonishment and emerging respect softening his features, the realization dawning that control over behavior and emotion was not solely derived from authority, schedules, or rules, but could be guided by patience, attentiveness, and unwavering calm. The quiet moments stretched, punctuated only by the subtle shifts of Eli's body and the small, deliberate gestures of Aaliyah, each one reinforcing the boy's sense of security and the emergent trust that began to take root. Shadows lengthened across the room, the interplay of light and form accentuating the intimacy of the interaction, while outside, the gentle breeze moved the curtains slightly, adding a soft, ambient movement that mirrored the flow of understanding now established between Aaliyah and Eli. Every glance, every breath, every subtle gesture contributed to a tapestry of connection that transformed the space, where empathy and calm became the instruments of change, quietly reshaping the relationship between father, child, and caretaker. A transformation that promised to continue unfolding well beyond the walls of the sunlit nursery. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of the Whitmore mansion, stretching across the polished wooden floors and casting elongated patterns of warmth over the plush carpet, where Eli remained nestled against the blanket Aaliyah Brooks had placed. The room held a delicate balance between tension and tranquility, each moment pregnant with anticipation. As Charles Whitmore lingered near the doorway, his posture rigid yet softened at the edges, a man observing the quiet authority of patience unfold in a world usually dominated by control and schedules. Aaliyah adjusted the small stuffed animal beside Eli, her fingers brushing lightly against its surface, the motion almost imperceptible but deliberate, designed to convey reassurance and the steady presence of someone who understood the fragile rhythm of the boy's world. She spoke softly, her voice a gentle cadence, modulating each syllable to match Eli's tentative breathing, her eyes tracing the subtle micro-expressions on his face, the tiny flinch of a shoulder, the minuscule curl of a hand, calibrating her response to every movement. Charles's gaze moved from his son to Aaliyah and back, noticing the transformation of the room not through words, but through the shifting energy between them, the quiet power of empathy that seemed to bend the very space around them, a silent force more commanding than the mansion's grandeur or the authority his wealth afforded him. The chandelier above cast a soft, golden light across the nursery, glinting off the glass surfaces and highlighting the rich textures of the wood and fabric, every reflection catching on subtle movements, the faint rustle of the blanket, the gentle exhale of Eli's breath, the minute shift of Aaliyah's posture, forming a symphony of motion and stillness that wove a narrative of care and attention. Aaliyah maintained a careful distance, yet every gesture was a communication, a tactile message of safety, of presence, of understanding that allowed Eli to relax further, his fingers now curling slightly around the edge of the blanket, a tentative assertion of trust. The mansion, usually a place of formal distance and measured behavior, felt suspended, the air dense with possibility, every shadow and flicker of sunlight accentuating the intimacy of the moment, a vivid contrast to the large, echoing space of the estate and the weight of expectations that usually filled it. Charles shifted his weight slightly, the sound of polished leather meeting the floor punctuating the quiet as he took a hesitant step forward, his eyes fixed on the interaction, internalizing the realization that influence and authority were not always exerted through instructions or commands, but sometimes emerged from quiet, deliberate empathy that could guide even the most fragile or anxious mind. Aaliyah's calm demeanor created a flow, a rhythm, a conversation without words where her gaze, her careful placement of hands, and the cadence of her voice intertwined with Eli's subtle reactions, each motion building upon the last, guiding him toward stability, toward a moment of peace. Outside the nursery, the soft rustle of the gardens and the distant murmur of activity in the mansion created a background layer, framing the intimate scene inside, where time seemed to slow, where every breath and blink carried weight, and where Charles could only watch, absorbing the impact of care and patience embodied in Aaliyah's every movement. The air between father, son, and caretaker held a fragile tension, the kind that hinted at understanding yet to be fully formed, recognition of a skill and warmth that transcended wealth or authority, shaping a space that invited trust, attention, and connection. A tableau of human empathy set against the grandeur of the estate, signaling subtle yet profound shifts in the relationships at the heart of the household, the promise of growth, and the quiet unfolding of a deeper bond yet to be fully revealed. The room seemed to breathe along with the steady rhythm Aaliyah Brooks established, sunlight softening as it poured through the tall windows and glinted off the polished surfaces of the Whitmore mansion. Eli's small hands rested lightly on the blanket, no longer clutching or trembling, his head tilting just enough to glance up at her with a flicker of recognition and trust. Every micro-expression, from the slight relaxation of his shoulders to the evenness of his breathing, was amplified in the quiet atmosphere, the space between them charged with the subtle power of presence and attention. Aaliyah's eyes followed his movements closely, adjusting her posture in tandem with his, her fingers resting momentarily on the edge of the blanket before drawing back as if to communicate reassurance without intrusion, a silent dialogue of care. The soft hum of the air conditioning, the faint creak of the floor under her careful steps, and the distant murmur of activity in other parts of the mansion became a symphony of background cues, each layer highlighting the delicate interplay of focus, patience, and understanding she wove around Eli. Charles Whitmore remained near the doorway, his tall figure rigid yet softened by a growing realization, watching the transformation of the room as if witnessing a subtle miracle. His eyes traced the arc of sunlight across Eli's hair, the tilt of Aaliyah's head, the minute gestures of hands and fingers communicating safety, and the slight but undeniable shift in energy that suggested trust had been earned. Shadows lengthened across the nursery, stretching over the polished wood, the carpet, and the small toys carefully arranged by Aaliyah to create a sense of normalcy and comfort, a contrast to the formality and order that usually define the mansion. Each moment seemed to expand in weight, drawing Charles into the quiet gravity of the scene, the humbling realization that authority and wealth alone could not reach a child's heart in the way empathy and patience could. Aaliyah shifted slightly, repositioning a small pillow under Eli's arm, her motion deliberate and unhurried, allowing him to adjust to her presence at his own pace, and the room seemed to pause around them, every breath, every glance, every soft whisper suspended in a moment of attentive care. The mansion's grandeur receded in significance, replaced by the intimate drama of connection unfolding in the nursery, the space now defined not by material splendor, but by the careful calibration of gestures and attention that created trust. Charles's chest rose and fell slowly, his eyes flicking from Eli to Aaliyah and back. The subtle understanding settling in that influence could be measured in the quiet language of touch, posture, and tone rather than commands or schedules. Aaliyah's calm, deliberate presence established a flow that guided Eli without pressure, her movements reinforcing safety, her voice modulating to match the cadence of his newly steady breathing, each microgesture a step toward trust and comfort. Outside the windows, sunlight began its descent, painting the room in a warmer, softer hue, dust motes dancing like tiny stars in the ambient light, creating a visual echo of the subtle emotional shifts occurring within. The silence was not empty but charged, the kind that allowed reflection and understanding to settle in layers over time. A living dialogue between the maid, the child, and the father, bridging gaps with patience and human kindness. Every motion, every careful placement of hands and items, every measured breath contributed to a tapestry of empathy, drawing the tension from the room, weaving calm and attention into a space that had been fraught with anxiety and uncertainty, demonstrating that sometimes the simplest gestures of presence could carry the deepest impact, reshaping relationships and opening a pathway to trust, understanding, and connection that promised to ripple well beyond the walls of the nursery and the confines of the Whitmore mansion. Charles Whitmore's expression shifted subtly, the stern lines of his face softening as he watched Eli relax further under Aaliyah Brooks's patient guidance. The boy's small hands now resting calmly on the blanket while his eyes followed her with a quiet curiosity that had been absent before. Aaliyah remained crouched at just the right distance, maintaining a balance of attentiveness and space, each breath measured to match the gentle rhythm she was establishing, her eyes scanning for the smallest sign of discomfort or unease, while her hands hovered lightly, ready to provide reassurance without imposing. The sunlight through the tall windows changed angle slightly, casting long, warm streaks across the nursery, highlighting the textures of the carpet, the smooth edges of the furniture, and the subtle movement of dust particles floating in the beams, each one catching the light like a tiny suspended spark, reflecting the quiet tension and the soft unfolding of trust. Charles's tall frame remained near the doorway, but his shoulders eased as he absorbed the transformation taking place, recognizing that authority and presence were not always enforced through commands or schedules, but could be guided through empathy, patience, and careful attention. Every motion of Aaliyah was deliberate, almost choreographed, a silent dialogue with Eli as she shifted a small pillow, adjusted a blanket, and spoke in low, rhythmic tones. Her words a soft cadence that reinforced safety, trust, and calm, creating a space where the boy could explore his emotions without fear. Eli's breathing continued to deepen, and the occasional blink of his eyes toward Aaliyah's face indicated a growing awareness that he was understood and supported. The room now filled with an intangible warmth that contrasted with the formal precision and structured environment of the mansion. The chandeliers above cast gentle reflections across the polished wood, and the soft hum of the air conditioning blended with the subtle creak of the floorboards under Aaliyah's careful steps, layering a complex soundscape that emphasized the quiet gravity of the moment. Charles, taking a careful step forward, observed the scene as a witness rather than an authority, noting how the interplay of small gestures, soft tones, and steady presence could influence behavior and create a bond without directive force, a realization both humbling and enlightening. The subtle movements, the careful placement of objects, and the modulation of Aaliyah's voice created an almost imperceptible choreography that guided Eli into a state of calm, each adjustment reinforcing the sense of security and trust she had cultivated. Outside, the fading light highlighted the contrast between the mansion's opulence and the intimate drama unfolding within, with every shadow, reflection, and flicker of sunlight emphasizing the extraordinary effect of ordinary human empathy. Charles felt the shift within himself as he recognized that the real authority in the room was not defined by wealth or status, but by the ability to connect, to listen, and to respond with patience and care, and the realization sparked a subtle, inward reflection on his role as a father and guardian. Aaliyah's calm focus and precise gestures continued, each small motion creating ripples of reassurance that Eli absorbed effortlessly, his posture and breathing attesting to the growing bond, a transformation both visual and emotional that filled the room with an almost tangible sense of peace. The air between father, son, and caretaker seemed to vibrate with potential, a suspended moment in which observation and empathy intertwined, every glance, every breath, and every deliberate gesture combining to shift the energy in the room from anxious tension to quiet connection, leaving Charles with a sense of awe at the power of presence and the profound impact of attentive kindness within the structured world of the Whitmore mansion. Charles Whitmore exhaled deeply, the weight of realization settling across his broad shoulders as he observed the transformation taking place before him. Eli's small form now rested quietly on the carpet, his eyes half closed in the security of Aaliyah Brooks's patient presence, his breathing steady and calm, a stark contrast to the anxious rocking and murmurs from moments before. Aaliyah remained close, her hands poised but relaxed, her posture unwavering, her dark eyes reflecting both attentiveness and quiet strength as she monitored the boy's subtle cues, each flicker of muscle or blink of the eye informing her next gentle movement. The sunlight shifted again, spilling warmer, more golden beams across the polished hardwood floors, highlighting the delicate textures of the nursery. Woven rugs, soft toys, and carefully positioned pillows, and casting long, fluid shadows that danced across the room in synchrony with the unfolding calm. Charles stepped lightly into the room, the soft creak of his polished shoes against the floor a rare, humanizing sound in the otherwise serene and precise environment, and he felt the subtle shift in authority and energy, a recognition that leadership could be exercised not just through command but through observation and respect for the unspoken rhythms of those in need of care. Every movement Aaliyah made carried purpose, from the careful adjustment of a blanket under Eli's arm to the minuscule tilt of her head that invited him to orient himself to her gaze, creating a dynamic of trust and communication that spoke louder than words ever could. The gentle hum of the air conditioning mingled with the faint rustle of the fabric as Eli shifted slightly, forming a layered soundscape of subtle motion and ambient stability, while the muted glint of sunlight reflected across the polished surfaces, punctuating each small, deliberate action with visual emphasis. Charles's gaze softened further, noting the deliberate timing of Aaliyah's voice, the cadence and modulation of her soft whispers, guiding Eli's attention and easing his tension, teaching him through gentle repetition and careful observation that patience and presence could cultivate calm and security where frustration or rigid instruction might fail. Each element of the room, the gentle curvature of the furniture, the positioning of toys, the sunlight catching on the edge of a chair, acted in concert with Aaliyah's careful movements to create an atmosphere of reassurance and control that was entirely nonverbal, yet profoundly effective. Eli's small hands twitched toward the blanket, brushing against Aaliyah's fingers, a tentative gesture of acceptance and trust that filled the space with unspoken connection. Charles felt a warmth spreading through him, an almost unfamiliar understanding that the real influence in the room was not his own, but that of someone who could guide with empathy, who could attend to the subtleties of fear and uncertainty, and who could shape an environment through patience, care, and the measured application of human attention. Outside, the late afternoon sun continued its slow descent, painting the room in amber tones, the light stretching long across the polished surfaces and creating a tableau of serenity that highlighted the small but profound transformations occurring in real time. Every soft exhale, every measured shift of weight, every quiet glance, and subtle gesture formed a web of trust and calm that extended outward, touching both the boy and the father, suggesting a new possibility for connection and understanding that had not existed moments before. Aaliyah's presence remained steady, a silent anchor for Eli's newly discovered calm, and Charles, standing quietly behind them, felt the room shift not just physically but emotionally, the mansion itself absorbing the subtle impact of human kindness and empathy, the understanding that guidance and influence could come from attentiveness and heart rather than authority alone. The shadows lengthened, the sunlight glimmered, and the air hung suspended with the delicate energy of transformation, leaving Charles and Eli connected through observation, trust, and the profound lesson that sometimes the most powerful authority is found in the quiet, steady presence of someone who cares. The sun had begun its slow descent beyond the tall windows of the Whitmore mansion, casting the nursery in a golden, honeyed glow that stretched across polished floors and illuminated the edges of soft toys, blankets, and carefully positioned pillows with a warm, ethereal light. Eli sat quietly, now fully settled into the calm that Aaliyah Brooks had cultivated with patient, deliberate gestures and measured words, his small hands resting lightly in his lap, his eyes occasionally flicking toward her with an unspoken acknowledgement of trust. Aaliyah remained close, poised and attentive, every slight motion calculated to maintain the sense of safety she had established, the subtle curl of her fingers, the gentle tilt of her head, the even cadence of her soft, low voice all reinforcing the delicate balance of connection in the room. Charles Whitmore stood a few steps behind, absorbing the full weight of the transformation, his posture relaxed yet alert, eyes following each micro-movement with a mix of awe and quiet introspection, recognizing in the calm presence of Aaliyah a form of guidance and influence that his authority and wealth had never commanded. The mansion, usually a place of imposing scale and formal distance, had been reshaped in this room by a human connection so subtle and profound that every shadow, every flicker of sunlight on the polished surfaces, and every gentle breath seemed to emphasize the extraordinary intimacy and significance of the moment. Dust particles floated in the sunlight, catching the beams like tiny suspended stars, a visual echo of the trust that now bound the child to the caretaker, and the stillness that had settled over the nursery created an atmosphere of reflection, reverence, and quiet reverberation that seemed to ripple outward, touching both father and son in ways unspoken but deeply felt. Charles's hands, once clenched at the thought of control and schedules, now rested lightly at his sides, his gaze lingering on Eli's relaxed posture and the subtle, confident ease of Aaliyah's movements, a recognition of the profound effect of consistent patience and careful attention. The soft hum of the air conditioning, the faint creak of the polished floorboards, and the distant, muffled sounds from other parts of the mansion provided a gentle backdrop, amplifying the intimacy of the scene, the delicate interplay of light, sound, and human presence creating a space where authority was measured not in commands but in the depth of empathy and the attentiveness to nuanced signals of trust and comfort. Every small action Aaliyah made, from repositioning a blanket to adjusting the angle of a pillow or maintaining a steady, gentle gaze, reinforced Eli's confidence and sense of security, the quiet choreography of gestures and tones forming a tapestry of calm that Charles could not have anticipated but could now witness in full. The late sunlight slanted through the windows, elongating the shadows across the room and highlighting the connection between the three of them: father, son, and caretaker. A dynamic defined by understanding, patience, and the profound power of human empathy. In that golden light, the mansion's grandeur faded into background, leaving only the living tableau of trust, care, and the quiet affirmation that patience and compassion could reshape relationships and open pathways for growth and understanding. A lasting imprint that promised to extend beyond this sunlit nursery, hinting at a future where observation, attentiveness, and human kindness could transform even the most formal and imposing spaces into places of genuine connection.